Single mom thought she was buying a rundown auto shop, a fresh start for $500. But buried beneath the cracked concrete was something no one was meant to find. Within days, global authorities showed up. What she uncovered wasn't just shocking, it was classified. Watch this story till the end. The truth beneath her feet rewrites everything. Stick around. This story will change the way you see ordinary people forever. Before we begin, if stories of quiet courage, unexpected love, and everyday miracles speak to your heart, consider subscribing. One click helps us bring more of these true-to-life inspirations into the world, and we're so grateful to have you with us. Now, let's begin. The wind cut sharp through the flatlands of Fairfield, Montana, the kind of wind that scraped bare earth and memories alike. Rachel Dwyer tightened her grip on the steering wheel as the town sign flickered past, faded blue letters barely hanging on. Her 10-year-old son, Eli, slept curled in the passenger seat, clutching his sketchbook like it was a lifeline. His sneakers were dusty from rest stops. His hoodie had a ketchup stain from a gas station hot dog they shared 3 states back. They hadn't spoken much in the last hour. There wasn't much left to say. Rachel glanced at the rearview mirror. Nothing but 2 duffel bags, a toolbox, and a rusted red jack stand she couldn't bring herself to leave behind. That, and her discharge papers from the Air Force, folded once, then again, shoved deep in the glove compartment. She parked in front of the shop with a quiet exhale. The building looked even worse in daylight. The structure hunched low like it was ashamed to still be standing. Roof tiles curled upward like burnt leaves. The signage was sun-bleached beyond recognition, and the only thing legible on the cracked window was the ghost of a once bold phone number, missing digits, streaked with time. Rachel stepped out of the car and crunched across the gravel, boots heavy with the weight of a dozen choices she didn't want to make. "Mom?" Eli's voice was hoarse with sleep. She turned. "We're here." He blinked up at the auto shop, unimpressed. "It looks like it's about to fall down." She managed a dry smile. "Perfect. Matches everything else in our life." Inside, the smell hit first. Old oil, mildew, and something metallic and burnt lingering deep in the floorboards. Rachel flipped the light switch, more out of habit than hope. Nothing happened. The auction listing hadn't exaggerated. One garage bay was missing its overhead door completely. A workbench sagged under a decade of neglect. Rats had clearly claimed the front office at some point, but at least they were polite enough to leave it. She opened the door to the back, the sound of old hinges screaming into the stillness. Eli wandered toward the far corner of the garage. "What's that?" he asked, crouching near a steel hatch bolted into the concrete. Rachel walked over slowly, wiping sweat from her brow. She squatted beside him. The cellar door was circular, like something off a submarine, with 3 padlocks lined vertically. Heavy iron latches crisscrossed over a welded seam. It wasn't just old, it was deliberately sealed. "Storm cellar," Eli guessed. "Not like any I've seen." She ran her hand across the latch. Cold, too cold. That's when she heard it, a faint vibration. Not loud, just constant, deep, low, like the hum of old machinery far beneath them. Rachel stood up fast. "Back away from it, now." "But, no." Her voice sliced through the quiet. Eli stepped back, eyes wide. Rachel swallowed hard. Her skin itched with a sense of something. Not fear exactly, but a kind of knowing she couldn't shake. Like something was watching from under the ground. They made camp upstairs in the dusty storage loft that night. Rachel laid out sleeping bags near a cracked window overlooking the lot. She fixed the locks on the door, double-checked them, then checked again. Eli had already fallen asleep, curled into a ball with his sketchbook open beside him. She picked it up, flipping through the pages absently. Maps, mostly. Forests, cities. A perfect rendering of the Bonneville salt flats from memory. Then she saw it. The shop, drawn from above, like a blueprint, and beneath it, something else. A circle, labeled below. Rachel stared at the page for a long time. The wind rattled a piece of loose sheet metal outside. She set the book down carefully and reached for the flashlight. Quietly, she slipped downstairs. In the garage, the cellar door sat silent and still, but when she crouched beside it, she felt it again. That hum. not constant anymore, pulsing. Something down there was awake. She traced her fingers across the welded seam. 3 padlocks. Old, but not original. They'd been added later, and recently. Rachel stepped back. She turned off the flashlight, whispered to no one in particular, "Not tonight," and walked away. The vibration didn't stop. The sun broke over Fairfield in a pale smear of gray and copper, casting long skeletal shadows across the auto shop's cracked lot. Rachel Dwyer stood outside with a wrench in one hand and a black coffee in the other, both equally necessary. She'd barely slept. The cellar door's hum hadn't let her rest. Even now, in the light of day, she could feel it under her feet, faint, rhythmic, like a second heartbeat buried beneath concrete. She tried to shake it off. There was work to do. Real, tangible, above-ground work. The exterior panels of the shop were rusted through in places, and an old air compressor wheezed pitifully every time she tried to get it going. Eli was sitting on a milk crate near the roll-up bay door, sketchbook open on his lap, eyes flicking between the building and his page. He'd drawn the front of the shop with eerie accuracy, down to the tilted mailbox and the bent flag. Then he'd added the cellar door again, this time with jagged lines extending downward from it like roots or fractures. Rachel walked over and crouched next to him. "What's all this?" Eli tilted the sketchbook toward her. "It's what it feels like." She raised an eyebrow. "Feels like?" "Like it doesn't end at the floor, like it's deep, alive." Rachel stared at him. Her son had always had a mind that wandered beyond normal boundaries. It wasn't just intelligence. It was intuition, or something like it. He noticed things before adults did, saw patterns in places most people missed. But this was unnerving. "I told you not to go near it," she said, gently but firm. "I didn't," Eli answered, eyes still on the page. "But it's not done yet." Before she could respond, a truck door slammed across the street. Rachel looked up and spotted Marty Calhoun stepping out of his ancient Dodge Ram, arms full of coiled wire and scrap metal. He gave her the same look he'd given her every morning for the past week, suspicion mixed with just enough curiosity to keep him from ignoring her entirely. She walked over, wiping her hands on a rag. "Morning," Marty grunted. Rachel tried again. "You used to work next door when this shop was running?" "Used to weld custom rigs. That was 20 years and 2 heart attacks ago." She pointed her thumb at the garage. "You know anything about that cellar under my floor?" He stopped coiling wire, didn't look at her. "You're asking about that now?" "Now's when I'm standing on top of it." Marty rubbed the back of his neck. "Place has a history, not all of it worth repeating." "Try me." He glanced around, then leaned in slightly. "That door wasn't always there. The original owner put it in sometime during the late 60s. Folks said he got a visit from some government fellas after that. Next thing anyone knew, he stopped showing up. Shop changed hands 6 times after that. None of them stayed long." Rachel folded her arms. "And the cellar?" "Welded shut by me. Under orders." Her breath hitched. "Whose orders?" Marty looked at her for a long moment. "Let it stay closed, Miss Dwyer. You got a boy to think about." She wanted to press, to demand answers, but Marty had already turned and was hauling scrap into his own shop, door clanging shut behind him. Rachel walked back across the street in a slow fog of dread. When she stepped inside her own shop, she saw Eli standing on the cellar door again, not touching, just standing, listening. "I said stay away from that thing," she snapped, louder than she intended. He jumped back, startled. "I wasn't doing anything." Rachel put both hands on her hips, struggling to level her voice. "I'm serious, Eli. I don't know what's under there, and until I do, you stay clear. Promise me." He hesitated, then nodded. That night, when Eli went to sleep upstairs, Rachel didn't even pretend to rest. She sat in the office with a flashlight, a crowbar, and a socket wrench, staring at the iron cellar door like it might blink first. By midnight, she gave in. The first padlock came off easily. It was so rusted, it snapped with a hard twist. The second resisted, but her old Air Force torque bar made short work of it. The third wasn't rusted at all. It gleamed faintly like it had been replaced recently. Rachel's pulse quickened. She pried it off slowly, carefully, then lifted the iron bar securing the hatch. A hiss of stale air escaped from beneath, thick and chemical, laced with the tang of old metal and dust. The lid groaned as she pushed it open. A long, winding staircase spiraled into the dark, steel steps bolted to concrete walls that descended into silence. She grabbed her flashlight. At the top step, she paused and looked back, half expecting Eli to be standing there. He wasn't. Rachel took the first step down. The staircase went deeper than expected, 40, maybe 50 feet below. The air grew colder, denser. At the bottom was a narrow corridor lined with rusted conduit and decaying wall panels, most of them labeled with peeling white tape, AUX power, monitoring, level C. At the end of the hallway was a thick, circular door. It looked like it belonged on a submarine or a vault, military design, early Cold War maybe. A red light glowed faintly above it. Her flashlight caught something scratched into the wall beside the door. Night drive, unclassified eyes only. Rachel stepped closer. Her breath fogged in the chilled air. Her fingertips brushed the door. Then something buzzed, not her flashlight, the door itself. A soft vibration pulsed from its center outward, like a sensor had registered her presence. Then it clicked, not unlocked, just awake. Rachel stumbled back a step, adrenaline kicking in. The light above the door shifted from red to yellow. She turned on her heel and rushed back up the stairs, lungs tight, every step an echo that chased her into the night. Back in the garage, she slammed the cellar hatch closed and dropped all 3 locks back in place, hands shaking. Upstairs, Eli was awake, sitting up in his sleeping bag, sketchbook on his knees. He looked at her without speaking. On the page in front of him was a new drawing, not the cellar door, the corridor, the vault door, the word night drive, already penciled in before she ever said a word. Rachel crossed the room, took the book gently, and whispered, "How did you know?" Eli looked down at the drawing. "I saw it," he said softly, "in a dream." The morning after the cellar door stirred to life, Fairfield was blanketed in a light frost, the kind that dusted windshields and turned the ground brittle beneath your boots. But Rachel Dwyer wasn't thinking about the cold. She was downstairs again, staring at the metal hatch in her garage like it might blink or breathe. She'd locked it back up last night, 3 padlocks tight as ever. But it didn't matter. Something had changed. The thing underneath wasn't sleeping anymore. Eli hadn't said another word about his dream. He just looked at her that morning, eyes full of unspoken things, and handed her back the sketchbook. The page was now inked, not just pencil, as if what he'd seen had gained permanence overnight. Rachel stood alone now, crowbar in hand, and stared at the sealed door. "Okay," she muttered, "no more pretending." She removed the locks again, her hands steady this time. One by one, the hatch creaked open. The smell was stronger this time, metallic and chemical, like the sting of old batteries mixed with the cold breath of earth. She descended, 47 steps. She counted. At the bottom, the same corridor greeted her. Damp walls, ancient conduit piping. That thick, mechanical stillness that didn't belong to any building, meant for cars or grease or people. Rachel stood in front of the vault door again. The yellow light above it pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat. She pressed her palm against the circular indent in the center. The vibration responded, warming faintly under her skin. Click. The wheel in the center of the door turned an inch, just enough. Then, with a reluctant groan, the door began to rotate inward. Beyond it, darkness stretched deep, swallowing the flashlight beam in a hallway lined with green-painted steel and a floor that sloped gently downward. Rachel hesitated, then stepped through. The air was heavier inside, cold in a way that felt intentional, like the building itself was refrigerated to preserve something. She passed through a decontamination corridor. Peeling warning signs read, "Classified personnel, only and no unauthorized transmission beyond this point." Her boots echoed in the silence, her breath fogging ahead of her. Then she found it. The control room. Rows of outdated equipment sat still but undisturbed. Cassette-based data reels, CRT monitors, analog dials, military-style switchboards with yellowed labels, satellite feed A, echo transmission, intelligence relay, ARPANET. One panel still hummed faintly. Not loud, but unmistakable. Something had power. In the corner sat a metal desk, its top covered in folders. Most were unmarked. One, however, was stamped with a black logo she didn't recognize and the words, Project Night Drive, unclassified eyes only. She opened it. Inside were typewritten reports from the early 1970s, observation logs, intercepted radio traffic, maps with pins and grid coordinates stretching across the Midwest. One document referenced passive surveillance nodes embedded in civilian sectors. Another read, Phase 3 deployment compromised due to congressional inquiry. Secure storage relocated. Rachel frowned. These weren't repair manuals or maintenance files. These were operation briefings, intelligence documents. She flipped deeper into the file. The last entry was dated 1982. It simply read, Project status, dormant, reactivation. Prohibited without Level 7 clearance. On the back page was a list of names, all redacted in thick black ink. Rachel closed the folder slowly. A clatter made her jump. Behind her, a door in the far wall stood ajar, barely. The hinges protested when she pushed it open. Inside was a surveillance room. Dozens of reel-to-reel machines lined the walls, many still threaded with dusty tape. A map of the continental U.S. covered the back wall, red string lines connecting towns she'd never heard of, crossed over one another like spiderwebs. Pins marked locations. Several were labeled Echo Point or Intercept Loop. In the center of the room sat a projector, its bulb long dead, but the reel next to it was labeled in black ink, Intercept 014B, Field Transmission, Northwest Region. Rachel picked it up and turned it over in her hands, heavy, sealed tight. Mom? She nearly dropped it. Eli stood in the doorway, pajamas, bare feet, sketchbook in hand. I told you to stay upstairs, she said, voice sharp with alarm. He looked around, eyes wide. I followed the sound. Rachel crossed to him quickly. You can't be down here, Eli. It's not safe. He pointed at the wall of machines. It was louder a few minutes ago. What was? The signal. She froze. What signal? Eli shrugged like it was obvious. The one that started last night. Rachel felt a chill crawl up her spine. She took his hand. We're going back up, she said, but... No, now. They ascended in silence. Back in the garage, Rachel resealed the hatch, this time replacing the third padlock with a fresh one of her own. She shoved a tool chest over it and backed away. Eli watched her. You're scared, Rachel sighed. I'm cautious. Because of the papers? She narrowed her eyes. What papers? The ones with the names blacked out. Rachel stared at him. Eli, you didn't read those. He didn't answer. Instead, he flipped open his sketchbook. On the newest page was a series of circles and arrows, drawn like a diagram. At the center was the word, Night Drive. She took the book from his hands, slowly. What is this? I don't know, he said softly. I just draw what I see. Rachel sank into the nearest chair. She needed help. She needed someone who knew what this place was, what it had been for. But she couldn't call the police. She couldn't exactly tell them, hey, I found a Cold War surveillance bunker under my garage. Her eyes fell on the folder again, and on the back of one document, a phone number, barely legible. No name, just internal clearance line, secure. She picked up her phone and stared at the digits, and then she did something she hadn't done in years. She hesitated. There are silences that comfort, like the hush of snow on pine trees, the soft breath of a sleeping child. Then there are silences like the one that began to settle over Rachel's shop in the days after she opened the vault door, heavy, watching, alive. Outside, Fairfield moved at its usual glacial pace. Farmers tended to thawing tractors, dogs barked at the mailman, and the diner still served the same burnt coffee and overcooked eggs. But inside the garage, time hung like thick oil in the air. Nothing seemed to move naturally, not the shadows, not even the dust. Rachel threw herself into surface tasks. She patched a roof leak above the loft, rewired the fuse box near the front desk, scrubbed rust off the old lift arm with a wire brush until her hands ached. But her focus remained fractured. Something under the concrete was humming again, faint and steady. as if the bunker beneath had heard her name, remembered it. Each night, as the temperature dropped and the walls seemed to draw in closer, the vibrations returned, not loud, but present, like the rhythm of breath in a dark room, pulsing up through the floorboards while Eli slept just feet away. He began sleepwalking again. Twice, Rachel found him standing barefoot on the cold concrete near the cellar door, eyes wide but unseeing. He never remembered how he got there. Once, he muttered numbers in his sleep. Coordinates, she realized, from her time reading military grid maps. Numbers tied to nowhere obvious. She tried to keep him busy. She handed him an old carburetor to disassemble, took him to the salvage yard to hunt for parts, let him paint the tool cabinet red with leftover spray cans. But every time she looked over, he was sketching again, drawing corridors, lights, red lines running along walls. One page showed the vault door, accurate down to the rivets and warning signs she hadn't even described aloud. By the third day, Rachel gave up pretending the situation was normal. She made her way across the gravel lot to Marty Calhoun's shop, her coat pulled tight against the wind. She didn't plan what she'd say. There was no script for this kind of fear. Marty was in the back lot, welding a rusted plow frame, sparks flaring orange in the dull light. He didn't look up when she spoke. "I went down there," she said. He lifted his visor but still didn't turn. She continued. Told him about the bunker, the humming, the documents. She left out Eli's drawings. She didn't know how to explain them without sounding unhinged. Marty didn't interrupt, just stared at the plow. Then he told her he remembered welding the door shut. Said he'd done it under orders from two men who never gave names, just ID badges and a check. Said the men didn't talk much, but one of them shook when he lit a cigarette. "Places like that," Marty muttered, "aren't meant to be opened again." Rachel returned home with her thoughts wrapped tight as wire. That night, she stared at the paper in her coat pocket, the phone number from the night drive file. She unfolded it slowly, sat down in the empty office, and dialed. The line clicked twice. A calm male voice answered, emotionless. No greeting, just, "State your clearance or hang up now." She hesitated, gave her name, her service number, her rank. There was a pause. Then a second voice came on, this one colder, more focused. He said she shouldn't have opened the facility, that she didn't understand what she'd reactivated, and then, with precision, he hung up. Not a goodbye, not even a warning, just a severed line. Rachel sat in silence for a long time, the phone still warm in her hand. She didn't tell Eli. The next morning, he looked pale, distracted. At breakfast, he pushed his cereal around without eating. "There was someone outside the window last night," he said. Rachel turned slowly. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "They didn't knock, they just watched." She searched the property. Nothing. No footprints, no tire tracks. But the lock on the cellar door, the fresh one she'd installed, was missing. Not broken, not tampered with. Gone, as if removed with a key she never gave. She bolted the door shut again, wedged a beam across it, and pushed the tool chest back on top. She stood there for a long time, listening. That afternoon, a low-flying helicopter passed over the town. Black, silent, no markings. Rachel watched it from the upstairs window, tracking its arc across the frozen wheat fields beyond the highway. It hovered for a few seconds over the ridgeline, then vanished. That night, Eli drew again. He used red ink this time. The new diagram looked like a heat map, corridors glowing, pulsing. The deeper he drew, the redder the lines became. "Where did you see this?" she asked. He didn't answer. She found herself reaching for the folder again. The papers inside seemed older now, more brittle. She reread the last entry. Project status, dormant, reactivation. Prohibited without level 7 clearance. Yet something down there had stirred. Late that night, she sat in the dark office, lights off, only the sound of the wind moving through the broken frame of the garage door. Outside, the moon had slipped behind the ridge. She stared at the cellar door again. The floor around it was silent, still, until the hum returned, stronger than before. A new rhythm, not just mechanical now, like code. The bunker wasn't dormant anymore. It was waking up, and it was listening. The knock came just after noon. 3 sharp raps, measured, not urgent. The kind of knock that says we already know you're home. Rachel was in the back of the garage, elbow deep in an old carburetor, her hands stained with grease and her mind far from polite company. She froze mid-turn, wrench clutched like a weapon. No one ever knocked at the shop, not since she'd arrived, certainly not on a Wednesday. She wiped her hands, took a breath, and opened the front door. A man stood on the porch, crisp black coat, clean-shaven, aviators despite the overcast sky. Government, no question. He radiated that quiet confidence, like he never needed to explain himself. "Ms. Dwyer?" he asked, voice calm, as if they'd scheduled this meeting. Rachel didn't answer right away. She clocked the rental sedan behind him. Government plates. No one in town drove those. The man held out a wallet badge just long enough for her to glimpse the seal. Department of Homeland Security, Agent Declan Morse. Rachel crossed her arms. "What can I help you with, Agent Morse?" He smiled politely, the kind of smile that didn't touch his eyes. "Mind if I come in?" She paused. "I do." He nodded once, like he respected that, then stepped back half a pace. "We've received chatter. Signals originating from this location. Old systems. Frequencies no longer in public use." Rachel didn't blink. "I've just been fixing up an old shop." "That's not all you've been doing." Behind her, Eli stirred upstairs. She could hear the familiar scuff of his feet crossing the wooden loft. Morse's eyes drifted briefly toward the sound, then back to her. "Some places," he said, "are meant to stay closed, especially ones tied to programs buried for a reason." Rachel didn't flinch. "And what programs would those be?" He didn't answer, just reached into his coat and handed her a card. It wasn't standard DHS. It had a direct line, no office extension, no title beneath his name, just a black strip across the bottom that read, "Internal Liaison, Langley Protocol." "If you find anything unusual," he said, "you call that number. Before someone else does." He didn't linger, walked back to the car without waiting for a response. As the engine faded down the block, Rachel felt her stomach turn, not from fear, but from recognition. Langley, the CIA. The name came with weight, shadows, things that never saw courtrooms or headlines. She closed the door slowly and locked it. Upstairs, Eli stood in the hallway clutching his sketchbook. His face was pale. "Who was that?" She didn't lie. "Government. DHS." He swallowed. He looked like the man from the window. Rachel tensed. "You saw him?" Eli nodded. "In the dream, the one where the red lights came back." That night, Rachel couldn't sleep. The card sat on the kitchen table, Morse's name etched like a threat. She made tea she didn't drink, watched the moon crawl across the cracked window pane. Below her feet, the cellar hatch vibrated again, faint, like an old engine coughing awake. By morning, the decision had been made. She returned to the bunker. The hatch opened easier now, like it welcomed her. No more groans of rust or the groaning weight of sealed years. The spiral stairs descended into stale air and flickering fluorescent light. Some of the bulbs had activated, automatically without her touch. Something had changed. The bunker wasn't dead. Rachel moved deeper into the facility, flashlight lowered. She followed the map from Eli's drawing, which, disturbingly, had been accurate to the inch. Through a reinforced blast door, she found the room she hadn't dared to enter before. A sealed data vault. Rows of filing cabinets, magnetic tape reels, and glass-enclosed server towers stood untouched. She approached a central console, dials and sliders. One screen flickered weakly, green letters blinking across the black. Status, standby, awaiting protocol initiation. She hesitated, then reached for a switch labeled Terminal Input, Manual. A keyboard slid from beneath the console. Dust scattered, Rachel typed instinctively. Something coded, something buried in memory. Her old call sign, a confirmation string. Letters that shouldn't still live in her head, but did. The system responded with a soft tone. Then words. Confirmed night drive. Wake signal. Line active. And beneath that, receiving connection. Langley node. 12. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. Someone was listening. Actively. She reached for the keyboard, typed, "Identity unknown. Site reactivated unintentionally. Request purpose of this system." The reply came 30 seconds later. "This node is not to be used for public communication. Terminate transmission immediately. Monitoring in progress." She didn't disconnect. Instead, she typed, "There's a child. He's affected." This time, there was no response, just a blinking cursor. Rachel stared at the screen until the power cut. Everything went dark in a single breath. The hum returned, low, disapproving, a system shutting down from within. She made her way back up, heart pounding. In the garage, the lights were off. The sun hadn't fully risen yet. On the floor near the hatch was something she didn't remember dropping. A cassette tape, labeled by hand in fading ink. Night drive, intercept 014-B. Back upstairs, Eli was awake. He looked at the tape, then up at her. "I heard it," he whispered, "before you even picked it up." She didn't ask what he meant. Not yet. The storm finally broke on a Thursday, not with thunder or rain, but in whispers and wires, through static that hissed and ticked like an old watch rewinding itself. Rachel stood alone in the bunker again, the heavy cassette from the previous day now turning inside a refurbished reel-to-reel player. She'd spent hours the night before restoring it, sourcing replacement belts, cleaning oxidation off the magnetic heads. She'd worked with the same model in the Air Force years ago. The controls felt familiar, the process muscle memory, but the sound it played back now was anything but. Clicks, pauses, long tones, Morse code. She wrote it down as it came. A chain of short and long bursts, meaningless to most. But to Rachel, the rhythm tapped directly into training she hadn't used since her early 20s. It wasn't just a string of letters, it was a sentence. Station 014-B activated. Return coordinates, node silence protocol not in effect. She stared at the translation. Whoever had sent this didn't just know about the facility, they expected someone to respond. And worse, they didn't think the system was supposed to be offline anymore. The message looped, over and over. No origin timestamp, no return address, just expectation. Eli appeared in the doorway, holding a map, an old fold-out road atlas Rachel had picked up from the thrift store months ago. He laid it on the floor in front of her without a word. Red pen marked several points across Montana. Lines connected them like constellations. At the center of it all, Fairfield, their town. Rachel knelt beside him. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "I didn't," he said. "I just remembered it." He tapped one point, northeast, toward the Canadian border. "That's where the others are, listening, like the one under us." Rachel's blood turned cold. "You're saying there's more of these?" He didn't answer, just circled another point, this one in eastern Wyoming. Rachel looked closer. Each mark on the map lined up with old Air Force radar stations, decommissioned in the 80s, forgotten by most. But Eli had connected them into a grid, one that formed a wide perimeter across the northern U.S., like an old fence or a net. She glanced back at the message she'd translated. Node silence protocol not in effect, which meant they were all active, not just this one. Rachel took the cassette out of the machine, slid it into a lead-lined container she found in one of the adjacent rooms, and sealed it tight. She knew what was coming. If one node had reawakened and reached out, others might too. She needed to understand why, and what the network had been meant to do. Deeper in the bunker, she found a sealed compartment marked Operations, Vietnam Phase Relocation. The files inside were thick with dust, bound with rotting twine. She pulled one loose and began to read. The language was clinical, unfeeling, but behind the acronyms and directives was something chilling. Project Night Drive shall serve as a domestic intelligence relay network, embedded beneath rural infrastructure. Civilian discovery must be prevented at all costs. Psychological leakage expected in proximity cases. Observed phenomena include subconscious geographic imprinting, disrupted circadian patterns, and increased sensitivity to long-wave signals in children under 12 years of age. Rachel stopped breathing for a moment. She read the last line again, children under 12. She looked at the corridor, as if she might see Eli through the steel walls. Suddenly, the drawings, the sleepwalking, the numbers muttered in dreams. They weren't just oddities. They were symptoms, not of trauma, of exposure. She ran upstairs. Eli was on the floor, his sketchbook open to a new page. A hand-drawn diagram of a transmission console, like the one she'd just left in the bunker. Identical, with the word Lev written in the corner. He looked up at her. His eyes were bloodshot. "I heard it again," he said. "In my head. It's getting louder." Rachel sat beside him, heart pounding. She wanted to lie, to tell him it was fine, that nothing could hurt them. But that wasn't true anymore. Down the street, a car engine purred to a stop. Rachel peeked through the curtains. Agent Morse stood at the curb, not alone this time. A second car parked behind his. Two men stepped out, both in unmarked suits. She met him outside before they could reach the porch. "We need to talk," he said. "You brought friends. They're not here to hurt you. But this needs to end, Rachel." She folded her arms. "Define end." Morse didn't smile this time. "That cassette you played? We intercepted the signal from 3 separate locations. You reawakened a dormant broadcast system buried by executive order. You don't understand what you're dealing with." "I understand my son is being affected, that he knows things no child should." Morse took a breath. "We tried to seal these nodes permanently in the 80s. Night Drive wasn't just surveillance. It was psychological research, behavioral modeling, field resonance theory, things that should have never left the lab." Rachel felt her knees nearly give out. Morse stepped closer, lowering his voice. "If you want to keep him safe, you'll shut it down. Now, before it pulls more attention than mine." She looked back at the house. Eli watched through the window. Morse followed her gaze. "We've been ordered to reseal the facility and to take custody of all materials, including the tapes." Rachel's voice hardened. "Not a chance." Morse pulled something from his coat, an NDA, several pages thick. "Then at least protect yourself. Sign this. Acknowledge none of this happened. Let us handle the rest." Rachel didn't touch the document. "I didn't spend 6 years in uniform just to get buried by the country I served." Morse looked disappointed. "You think the truth will save you. It won't. It'll just bury you deeper." She watched as he turned away. The 2 men followed him, silent. Not a threat, but a promise. That night, Rachel sat in the control room of the bunker. She powered up the analog transmitter Eli had drawn and sent her own message. Shortwave, public band, a burst transmission containing logs, coordinates, and the contents of the Night Drive files. It was risky, illegal, and irreversible, but it was truth. Before the system cut her off, she tapped in one last sentence. "They're still listening. You should be too." The transmission went out at 2:03 a.m., exactly 7 minutes after Rachel activated the bunker's analog system. The pulse began as a burst tone, low frequency, barely audible to human ears. It was the same kind of carrier signal once used in military espionage operations, a signature almost extinct in modern bandwidths. And yet, within 5 minutes, 6 amateur radio enthusiasts across the Pacific Northwest picked it up. By the 6th, 2 defense satellites silently logged the coordinates of origin. By the 7th minute, a file began transferring, coded, simple, almost primitive. A digital shell packed with scanned pages, memos, schematics, voice transcriptions, satellite imagery stamped redacted. Every page bore the same title, Project Night Drive. Inside the bunker, Rachel sat with Eli curled beside her, head resting on her lap. His eyes were closed, but his fingers twitched as if still sketching. She kept her hand gently on his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath the weight of silence. The static from the speaker pulsed like a second clock. Upstairs, the tool chest over the cellar hatch hadn't moved. The locks were in place, but the hum was louder now. The bunker didn't feel buried anymore. It felt awake, listening. She watched the transfer bar on the old green screen crawl forward, 78%, then 91%, then 100%, send complete. A second later, the speaker erupted with garbled transmission. Voice patterns, shuffled tones, then a synthesized male voice, flat and emotionless. Unauthorized broadcast confirmed. Node 014-B, civil breach. Prepare for neutralization. Rachel sat up straighter. Her training kicked in. She powered down the terminal but kept the recorder running. The room's lights dimmed briefly. A surge, or maybe something deeper. From the CB rig upstairs, a different voice crackled through. Marty's. "You just kicked a hornet's nest, Dwyer. Intercepts lighting up like fireworks. 2 black choppers just flew low past Ridge Point. That ain't weather patrol." Rachel responded with a clipped, "Copy that." She checked her watch. 2:11 a.m. She woke Eli gently. Time to go upstairs. He didn't argue. As they climbed, Rachel carried the cassette, the backup drive, and a folder of physical documents. She stashed them in a false bottom toolbox near the rear workbench, a contingency her father had taught her during survival training. By 2:30 a.m., a hum returned outside, not from below, but above. Rachel flicked off the interior lights and crouched beside the window. A black helicopter moved over the town, its rotors beating low and slow. No spotlight, no insignia. Silent, but not invisible. She watched it drift east, circle, then vanish. Eli stood beside her. "They're trying to find the signal," he said. Rachel nodded. What she hadn't expected came next. At 3:07 a.m., her phone buzzed. Not a call, a viral video, posted by a YouTube ham radio forum, titled, "They Never Shut It Down. Night Drive Files Leak, Full." The video had been online for only 12 minutes. Already 18,000 views. Rachel clicked it open. A familiar voice read from the documents she'd uploaded. Graphics overlaid each scan. A voiceover explained the theory behind the project, the embedded bunkers, the psychological effects of signal exposure. One section focused on children, another on subliminal conditioning. In the comments, the conversation had already fractured. Believers, deniers, veterans recalling stories, trolls mocking tinfoil hats. But the views climbed. She turned to Eli, who looked up at her with wide, calm eyes. "It's out now," he said. Rachel nodded. "And they can't put it back." That morning, nothing felt the same. Fairfield looked unchanged at a glance, sunrise across winter-dry wheat fields, the postman rolling down Main in his dented pickup. But the air vibrated differently, like the signal had shifted something fundamental. Marty came by at noon. No words, just a nod, and a file folder he left on her desk. Inside were copies, real names, contractor logs, payment ledgers from 1969 with government stamps. At the bottom, one line in red ink, "You're not crazy. You were right to open it." Rachel sat alone after he left, folder in her lap, heart thudding. She looked at Eli's latest sketch, the signal diagram. The lines now spread far beyond Montana, coastal arcs, international reach. The system hadn't just turned on again, it had remembered what it was built for. By nightfall, the garage no longer felt like a shop. It felt like a war room. Rachel paced slowly along the perimeter of the upstairs loft, one eye on the window, the other on the shadows forming in the street below. Fairfield was quiet. Too quiet. Not the usual rural stillness, but the brittle, breath-held pause of something held at bay. A silence with weight to it. The kind of silence that follows a warning and precedes a reckoning. Downstairs, Eli sat hunched over the desk, surrounded by 3 radios, 1 cracked laptop, and a pencil map scrawled across 5 taped-together sheets of legal paper. His fingers traced signals like muscle memory. He barely looked up anymore, but Rachel knew he was still present. Hyper-present. As if something deeper had turned on inside him. The broadcast had changed everything. What had started as an anonymous transmission had now been shared by a dozen fringe media accounts, then picked up by independent journalists, and even briefly flagged by a minor news affiliate in Idaho before being pulled without explanation. The video, now re-uploaded by others, had passed 500,000 views. The night drive files were officially public, and yet the silence from the government was total. No statements, no denials, not even a PR stunt, just absence. Until they came. At 2:17 a.m., Rachel awoke to the sound of footsteps, not in the loft, not outside, in the garage. She moved like a ghost, silent and precise, down the metal stairs. The lights were off, the windows covered. Her hand reached instinctively for the revolver she kept hidden in the electrical box. Then, a sound, a whisper of fabric, the faint creak of leather against concrete. She caught movement near the back door. Not one figure, three. Black silhouettes against a darker backdrop. No words, no lights. They moved with purpose, surgical, disciplined, professionals. Rachel slipped behind the compressor, held her breath, and watched. The figures examined the cellar door. One produced a small scanner. Another unslung a device from his back, not a weapon, a jammer. They were here to erase something. Before she could act, a voice split the silence from her CB radio upstairs. Rachel, movement confirmed, back entrance, not amateurs. Marty. The sound made one of the men flinch. Not much, but enough. Rachel seized the opening, flicked the breaker switch beside her, and the entire garage exploded in light. Eli was already standing in the loft, flashlight beam angled downward. For one suspended moment, everyone froze. Then the intruders moved, fast, too fast. One kicked open the rear door, another lobbed something toward the cellar, a device the size of a hockey puck. Rachel reacted before she thought, tackled it midair, and smothered it under a heavy tarp. The explosion was muted, but the shockwave knocked her backward. When she stood again, the men were gone, not a trace, except for a footprint on the cellar door, and a black patch burned into the tarp, melted plastic, and silence. By dawn, Marty had joined them in the garage. He brought his old service rifle and a thermos of black coffee, strong enough to clean carburetors. Rachel paced while he took stock of the damage. They didn't want the files. They wanted the system, she said. Marty nodded grimly. And they didn't expect you to fight back. They debated calling Morse, but Rachel already knew the answer. He wouldn't help. He might not even be in control anymore. Instead, they focused on securing what they could. Marty welded a new bracket over the cellar hatch. Rachel reinforced the lock with a bent steel axle. Eli, now almost eerily calm, redrew the entire facility map from memory and marked pressure points, choke points, air vents. At 10 a.m., a black SUV pulled into town. Rachel watched from the roof. Morse stepped out alone. No backup, no visible weapon, just a folder under his arm and the weight of something unsettled in his shoulders. Rachel met him at the edge of the lot. "That wasn't me," he said, "but it was your people. Number not DHS. Not officially. We lost chain of command last night. Whatever came for you. It doesn't answer to anyone I can name." He handed her the folder. Inside, photos of the night drive facilities, not just Fairfield, dozens across the Midwest. Some already excavated, others just marked by black ink circles. "They're waking up," he said, "and now that one's active, they all know." Rachel stared at the map. Morse looked hollow. "They want to clean house." She closed the folder. "You can help," she said. He didn't respond. He didn't have to. That night, Rachel made her decision. She set up a camera. Simple, one take, no edits. She sat in front of it, Eli beside her, and told the truth. About night drive, the bunker, the tapes, the attacks. She spoke like a soldier, calm, controlled. But the rage behind her voice cracked through now and then, like lightning behind clouds. Then she uploaded it. By morning, it had gone viral. But more importantly, it made people ask questions. Veterans, journalists, families who lived near decommissioned bases and remembered strange lights, sleepwalkers, missing children. All of them surfaced online, forming threads that even suppression algorithms couldn't hide. Fairfield became a point on a map, a beacon. Rachel didn't sleep that night, but for the first time, the house was not silent. The world was listening. The truth doesn't explode. It seeps. It bleeds through the cracks. It sits in people's kitchens over weak coffee and unanswered questions, in late-night phone calls between cousins who hadn't spoken in years, in the uneasy glances exchanged on grocery store sidewalks. That's how it started in Fairfield. A week after Rachel's video went live, it had amassed over 6 million views. Local cable ignored it. Major news outlets called it unverified conspiracy content. But online, it spread like spilled oil. And in small towns like Fairfield, places where neighbors still remembered your high school jersey number, rumors burned hotter than headlines. It began with the older folks, the ones who'd lived through the Cold War, who remembered black sedans parked near cattle fences, the flicker of lights no one could explain, men who spoke without accents and never gave last names. At Whitaker's Hardware, a retired crop duster named Don Booker stood next to the Bolts aisle and told anyone who'd listen about the night in 1974 when his fuel gauge dropped to 0 without explanation, just as he passed over the ridge near Rachel's property. At Elsie's Diner, a waitress found her elderly mother's journal in the attic, entries from 1968 detailing the noise under the floor, and a man from Helena who took the baby monitor and never brought it back. By the weekend, someone had painted 3 words on the side of Rachel's garage in red. She told truth. Marty hosed it off at dawn before Rachel could see it, not to hide it, but to keep the attention from escalating. Because that same morning, the reporters came, first in trickles, then in droves. Not the networks. They stayed away, safe in sanitized boardrooms. But the independents came in vans and dusty hatchbacks, carrying cameras and voices that didn't belong to any station. They knocked on Rachel's door, begged for interviews. Some camped outside, whispering into GoPros, documenting the bunker woman and the boy who drew the system before it woke. Rachel gave one interview, only one, to a veteran journalist named Nia Raines, who had covered war zones and refused to wear makeup. Nia listened more than she spoke, took notes in shorthand. She didn't flinch when Rachel described the cassette or the soldiers in black who vanished into the night. When the piece aired on her YouTube channel, it hit 10 million in 3 days. But what mattered more came from closer to home. The town began to show up. People left groceries on Rachel's porch, handwritten notes. A few left newspaper clippings, old stories about satellite programs canceled without reason. One anonymous envelope contained a copy of a discharge paper signed by a colonel tied to Night Drive's funding structure. Then came the real surprise. Marty sat with Rachel one night as Eli slept upstairs. The garage was quiet. The wind rolled in from the north. Marty held a bottle of rye in one hand and an old photo in the other. It showed a younger him, welding torch in hand, standing in front of what was unmistakably the vault hatch. "They hired me in '76, he said, voice low. Didn't tell me what it was. Paid in cash. Told me I was helping prevent Soviet infiltration. Back then, you didn't question it. You just did the job." Rachel took the photo gently. It felt like history had been placed in her palm. Marty looked down. "I welded it shut, Rachel. I buried it." "You didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't ask. That's worse." The guilt etched into his face wasn't performative. It was real. He wasn't absolving himself. He was indicting a system that had used men like him as human wrenches in a machine built on secrets. The next morning, Marty walked into town and did something no one expected. He told the truth, on record, to 3 independent journalists, with name, date, and documentation. His interview became the spine of every credible story about Night Drive. A first-hand witness who had nothing to gain, who'd lived in the same house for 40 years and never once filed a tax extension. His voice broke the algorithm. The DHS issued a bland statement 2 days later. Claimed Night Drive was a Cold War research program that had been discontinued due to operational inefficiencies. They denied any recent activity, denied presence in Fairfield, denied knowledge of the black helicopters. But they didn't mention Rachel, didn't mention Eli, didn't mention the footage. The town wasn't buying it. At the VFW Hall, veterans began organizing a petition to recognize Rachel's actions as whistleblowing protected under federal statute. A local professor launched a database compiling testimonies from residents across the Midwest who lived near decommissioned bases. The story was growing teeth. By the end of the month, Fairfield had changed. The post office installed a Dropbox for anonymous documents. Local teenagers live-streamed nightly watches of the skies. Someone even painted the old water tower with a phrase that had become a rallying cry. "Truth is the loudest signal." Eli, once a quiet boy with sketchbooks, became something else. Not a prophet, not a celebrity, but a thread, woven into something far larger. People wrote him letters, drew his maps, asked him questions about what the bunker felt like, what the hum sounded like. He never answered directly, just smiled and said, "It was always there." The first letter came folded in thirds and stamped in red. Notice of federal audit. Rachel stared at it, unmoving, as the morning wind pushed dust across her porch. The envelope rested in her hand like a verdict. She didn't open it right away. She already knew what it was. Not the contents, the intent. This was never about numbers or paperwork. It was a warning, subtle, bureaucratic, and practiced. Not a knock on the door, but a foot in it. The second came 2 days later. A zoning violation. The garage, they said, had not filed the appropriate historical structure exemptions, a form no one in town had heard of before. The third was more chilling. A letter from the State Department of Child Welfare. An anonymous report had been filed alleging that Eli had been exposed to militarized psychological trauma. Rachel didn't scream. She didn't cry. She filed each notice into a box labeled retaliation. By midweek, Rachel stood on a borrowed stage in Helena, Montana, flanked by 2 veterans from her old unit, both still wearing their patches. Before her sat a crowd of hundreds, small-town journalists, local politicians, former service members, and families from across the region. Many held copies of the night drive documents or printed transcripts of her broadcast. She spoke plainly, not like a victim, like a mechanic giving a debrief. "They want to discredit me," she said, "to paint me as unstable, negligent, paranoid. But here's the truth. I served this country. I followed orders. I trusted the system. And I'm here today because I finally stopped doing that." The room didn't explode with applause. It settled into something heavier, a silence of agreement, of recognition. Later that day, one of the attendees, a retired colonel named Joseph Harlan, handed her a flash drive. It contained declassified intelligence logs referencing Project Night Drive in relation to overseas psychological ops, operations that mirrored what Eli had experienced. "They didn't just use this on foreign soil," he said. "They ran dry tests here, on our own, rural populations, dispensable demographics." Rachel thanked him. By the following Monday, the Department of Homeland Security issued a second public statement. "The night drive materials recently circulated online are part of an outdated and non-operational training archive. No active bunkers exist. Claims of domestic psychological testing are unfounded and unsupported by internal records." But they went too far, because in denying everything, they galvanized everyone. The veterans' petition reached 60,000 signatures in 10 days. A group of former intelligence analysts began publishing breakdowns of the night drive documents, highlighting linguistic patterns and watermarking consistent with authentic government formatting. Even a few retired tech contractors chimed in, anonymously, to confirm that some of the systems Rachel had uncovered were still on the books, as black infrastructure maintained for potential reactivation. Rachel gave more interviews. She refused payment for any of them. She refused to appear on entertainment shows or monetize her story. She only ever said the same thing. "It's not about what I found. It's about what they tried to erase." One evening, Rachel came home to find Eli sitting on the roof of the garage, sketchbook balanced on his knees. He pointed toward the horizon. "It's louder now," he said. "Not bad, just closer." She climbed up beside him. The sun dipped behind the wheat fields in long strokes of gold and crimson. Below them, the shop stood still. The cellar door reinforced. The signal quiet for now, but something was shifting. Rachel held her son's hand. "You scared?" He shook his head. "It wants to be seen, that's all." She didn't ask what it was, not anymore. That weekend, Marty appeared on a national live stream alongside a constitutional lawyer. He recounted every job, every instruction, every silent handshake that led to his role sealing up the bunker. "I was told it was patriotic," he said. "I believed that, until I saw what was inside." They played the tape, the hum, the voice, the message from Langley Node 12. Marty looked into the camera. "If we let them bury this again, they'll just wait another generation to try it all over." The interview crossed 1 million views in a single night. By the end of the month, 3 congressional representatives issued a joint request for a special investigation into decommissioned psychological warfare facilities within U.S. borders. Rachel didn't celebrate. She checked the cameras, checked the lock, checked Eli's breathing. Then she sat in the bunker, alone, and waited. The first tour group arrived on a Thursday, 7 people, a quiet mixture of veterans, amateur historians, and one retired civics teacher from Nebraska who carried a pocket recorder and a spiral-bound notebook labeled Forgotten Projects. They didn't ask questions at first. They just stood there, silent, reverent, as Rachel opened the cellar door and guided them down the steel spiral staircase into the heart of what had once been an instrument of control. Now, it was something else. The bunker had changed, not in structure, but in meaning. The dust was cleared, the cables organized, and the analog terminals cleaned and labeled. Marty had welded a new safety railing along the walkways, patched rusted grates, and even reinstalled a red overhead light once used during emergency drills. The air still held that metallic bite of cold steel, but now it welcomed instead of warned. On the far wall, a new plaque read, Project Night Drive Operational, 1967 to 1982. Declassified 2025 by public demand. Beside it, under museum-grade glass, sat Eli's blueprint, his original pencil drawing from weeks ago. The lines were childlike but precise, the shape of the bunker unmistakable. Beneath it, in his own handwriting, it was always there. Rachel stood back as visitors leaned in. She didn't explain much. She didn't need to. Each person who stepped through those doors carried their own piece of the story, a memory, a rumor, a family member who'd worked on something they couldn't talk about. The bunker wasn't just a relic. It was proof. Word spread fast. Articles popped up on historical blogs. Veterans groups organized carpools. Professors reached out to verify details, cross-reference documents, request interviews. The Department of Homeland Security remained silent, but Rachel knew they were watching. She saw it in the unmarked cars parked just out of sight, the subtle interference in her internet connection. But they hadn't made a move, because they couldn't. Not now. 2 weeks after opening the bunker to the public, Rachel received a thick envelope in the mail. No return address. Military-grade paper. Inside was a formal letter bearing the insignia of her old unit, the 45th Tactical Maintenance Division. Ms. Rachel Dwyer, while we cannot speak on record about operations predating our current administration, we extend our respect and gratitude for your continued dedication to truth and transparency. Your service reflects the highest values of the armed forces. Semper Vigilans. Signed, Command Staff. 45 TMD. Rachel read it 3 times, then slid it into a frame and hung it just above the declassified folder display. That weekend, she found a folded note on her desk. No name, just 5 words scribbled in block lettering. You pulled the wires loose. She tucked it behind Eli's drawing. Each day brought someone new, a Navajo linguist who believed her grandmother had once worked decoding signals like those in Night Drive, a former CIA tech who said flatly, "You don't know how close they came to reactivating this in '01. A widowed man who hadn't spoken in years until he walked into the chamber and whispered, "I was here." They didn't always sign the guest book, but they always left changed. Marty took it all in with his usual silence, occasionally muttering about how they'll need better fire exits if this keeps up. Rachel smiled when he said it. He was right, though. They were outgrowing the space. The exhibit wasn't just a static display. It became a living archive. Eli built a digital replica of the blueprints using free software. He coded a simple interface so visitors could click through the different rooms, learn their purposes, and even listen to the cleaned-up bunker audio recordings. The files were saved locally, nothing in the cloud. Rachel insisted. She still didn't trust the signal. One night, as the last visitor left, Rachel stood in the middle of the chamber, arms crossed. The hum was gone, not silenced, just satisfied. Eli entered quietly, holding 2 mugs of hot chocolate. "They're going to write about you," he said. Rachel took her cup. "Then let them write about you too." He grinned. "I didn't do anything." "You listened. That's everything." They sat on the edge of the old control platform, legs dangling. Above them, the overhead red light flickered once, then held steady. Somewhere behind the walls, the old relay clicked to life, not broadcasting, just remembering. Rachel closed her eyes. Not everything broken needs to be destroyed. Some things can be restored. Some truths can be made whole. The memorial was simple. No ribbons, no televised speeches. Just a wooden sign carved by hand, set into the grass beside the shop. It read, in memory of those who were watched without knowing, dedicated by the citizens of Fairfield, Montana. May we never silence truth again. People came, not in masses, not with spectacle, but with quiet conviction. Families brought photos. Veterans left badges and medals. One woman placed a folded American flag at the foot of the plaque, her fingers trembling, her eyes dry. Rachel stood near the old garage door, hands in her jacket pockets, watching them arrive and depart. She hadn't spoken much that morning. The air had the kind of stillness that belonged to endings, or maybe beginnings. Eli stayed close by, silent but composed. He wore his dad's old Air Force jacket, sleeves rolled up, the collar too big for his thin neck. In his hands, he held a smaller version of his blueprint, the one that had started it all, now laminated, labeled. Node 01, Wideband Cognitive Response Array. He said the words like he'd always known them. Rachel had come to accept that somehow, maybe he had. Inside the bunker, the transformation was complete. What once had been a place for secrets had become a chamber of voices, not just exhibits, testimonies, video reels, audio logs, letters pinned to a corkboard near the terminal. One by one, they told a story that no agency could ever redact again. That morning, the final plaque had been mounted above the console. Truth is the loudest signal. It glinted under the overhead light. Marty stood nearby, hands still blackened from the mounting bolts. He nodded toward Rachel and gave a single grunt of approval. It was the most emotional he'd been in weeks. Then he left her to it. She stepped up to the console. It no longer buzzed, no static, no hum. It had gone silent weeks ago, right after the first live group visited. It was as if it knew it had been seen. Still, Rachel placed her hand on the main switch, not to activate, just to connect. For a long while, she stood there, remembering the night she arrived, the smell of dust and rust, the vibration beneath her feet, the fear, the decisions. Eli joined her. He didn't speak. He simply took a folded letter from his pocket and handed it to her. The envelope had no return address, just a stamp, half torn, and a word written on the back in precise lettering, declassified. Inside, a single sheet of paper, no watermark, no signature, only one word. Thank you. Rachel read it once, then again. She didn't try to decode it, didn't speculate who had sent it. She only nodded. The message wasn't for her alone. It was for all of them. Everyone who had been watched, everyone who had been used, everyone who had, in some way, heard the signal beneath the silence. Outside, the sky turned copper as the sun fell behind the fields. People lingered, then drifted away. A few stayed behind to help stack chairs, fold flags, pack boxes. One teenage girl left her phone number taped to the museum wall next to a note that read, "My granddad said he heard the hum too." By twilight, only Rachel, Eli, and Marty remained. Marty lit a cigar and offered one to Rachel. She declined. They stood in the lot, watching as the wind bent the prairie grass sideways. "So," Marty said, puffing smoke. "What now?" Rachel looked toward the shop, toward the ground beneath. "Now we make sure it never happens again." In the final scene, Rachel and Eli walked back into the bunker one last time. They moved together in the half-light, past the glass displays, the testimonies, the flickering terminals, toward the console that had once whispered from the dark. Rachel opened a panel below the desk and placed the letter inside, then closed it, not to hide it, to preserve it. She looked at Eli. He nodded, and as they turned to leave, a faint sound echoed behind them. Not a hum, not a voice, just a pulse, like a heartbeat beneath concrete, steady, software alive,